She found the letter on a Tuesday, tucked beneath the silver inkwell on his writing desk, and she knew by the smell of the parchment, cedar and old smoke, and something that was just him, that she had written it herself 3 weeks ago, and he had never read it. Mara pressed her cleaning cloth against the edge of the desk and held still. The letter sat where she had left it, the fold undisturbed, the wax seal unbroken. Her own thumbs, impression pressed into red wax, a crescent moon she had chosen because she did not have a sigil, because she had never been given one, because she was a servant of the Ironveil pack, and servants did not seal their letters with house marks. She had used the crescent anyway. She had thought it suited the occasion. He was downstairs naming his chosen. The sound rose through the stone floors like water through a cracked vessel. The great hall's applause, the drumbeat of the ceremony, the voice of High Keeper Aldrich intoning the words that would bind the Alpha King of Ironveil to the woman he had selected as his Luna. Mara could hear it. The whole East Wing could hear it. She imagined the maids in the lower corridor, pressing their ears to the walls, imagined the stable boys pausing their work to listen, imagined everyone in the castle with some private feeling about this moment, some small claim on it. She was the only one who had written him a letter. The cloth moved again. She worked it in slow circles along the edge of the mahogany, the way she had been trained, the way she had done it every morning for 4 years. The chambers smelled of him, pine resin and leather, and something mineral, like stone after rain. She had catalogued that smell without meaning to. She had catalogued a great many things without meaning to. The seal on the letter was still unbroken. She should leave it. She should finish the dusting, descend the servant's stair, and spend the rest of the day pretending she had never been foolish enough to write it. That was the sensible path. That was the path available to a woman who cleaned his chambers and never spoke to him directly, and had somehow, over the course of 4 years and 1,000 small unremarkable mornings, allowed herself to feel something she had no right to feel, for a man she had no right to want. But her hand moved toward the letter instead of away from it, and that was how the Alpha King found her when he came up the servant's stair alone 20 minutes later, standing at his desk with the letter in her hands, the seal broken, her face very still and her eyes very bright, reading back the words she had written to him in a moment of quiet and terrible honesty, on a night when she had believed the worst was still ahead of her, and had not yet understood that it had already arrived. He stopped in the doorway. She did not drop the letter. There was a long moment in which neither of them spoke, and the sounds of the ceremony below continued without them, and the afternoon light came through the tall window at an angle that made the room feel suspended. Not quite real, not quite finished, like a sentence interrupted at its most important word. "The ceremony is over," he said. "I know," she said. He looked at the letter. He looked at her. "That's mine," he said. "No," she said quietly. "It was addressed to you." "That's different." She folded it along its original crease, set it back on the desk beside the inkwell, and picked up her cleaning cloth. Her hands were completely steady. She did not know how that was possible. She suspected it was the same mechanism that had kept her steady through 4 years of watching him from corners and doorways and the narrow margins of his life. That quiet survival machinery that activates when emotion is too large to express and must instead be converted into composure. "I'll finish the windows," she said, "then I'll be out of your way." He did not move from the doorway. "Mara," he said, just her name, nothing attached to it. No command, no question, just the 2 syllables of it in his voice, which she had heard directed at her exactly 17 times in 4 years, because she had counted, because she was apparently a woman who counted such things and catalogued smells and sealed letters with borrowed crescent moons and felt things she had no right to feel. "Please," she said. It came out quieter than she intended. "Let me finish the windows." He stepped aside. She crossed to the window and began to clean it, her back to him, and he stood in the room behind her and did not speak, and the ceremony sounds faded below them as the afternoon opened itself up like a wound, slow and wide and aching. That was the beginning of the end of what she had been, and the start of what Ishu had always, without knowing it, been meant to become. But to understand how she arrived at that window, cleaning glass she could barely see through, she would need to go back further than Tuesday. She would need to go back 4 years, to a ceremony she had attended in a different capacity, in a different dress, under a name she had surrendered so completely that she had almost forgotten it was hers. Her full name was Mara Ashveil, not Mara the chambermaid, not Mara the quiet one. Mara Ashveil, third daughter of the Ashveil bloodline, a name that had once meant something in the territory between Ironveil and the eastern reaches, a name that had appeared in the old pack registries, alongside names like Harrow and Carrick and Voss, names that still appeared on banners and gateposts and the rosters of high ceremony. She had given it up the night her father died, not willingly. The giving up had been the kind that comes when you are young and alone and do not yet understand that you have options. When you are 17 and the only surviving member of a disgraced house, and a man with a kind face and a cold voice tells you that the simplest path forward is the one that requires you to be no one at all. The man had been Aldrich, who was now High Keeper, who had that morning stood in the great hall and intoned the binding words with all the ceremonial authority of his office, and who had once stood over her in a small stone room and offered her a choice between 2 kinds of disappearing. She had chosen the kind that let her stay. The Ashveil line had been accused of blood-breaking, of violating the sacred compact between their bloodline and the Ironveil pack by concealing a power that should have been declared, catalogued, offered to the Alpha for his protection. The accusation had come from Aldrich himself, quietly, after a closed council meeting, after her father's death from what the official record called a fever. The accusation had never been made public. It had not needed to be. Aldrich was not a man who used public accusations when private ones would accomplish the same result with less mess. He had told her that the Ashveil bloodline would be removed from the registry, that her sisters, already married into other houses, already safe, would not be touched if she agreed to make no claim on the name, that she could stay in the territory, within the pack's protection, employed in the castle's service, as long as she kept no record of herself, no correspondence with her sisters, no acknowledgement of what she had been. She had been 17, she had been alone, she had said yes. What she had not told him, what she had never told anyone, was that the power he'd accused her father of concealing was not her father's to declare. It was hers. It had always been hers. It had arrived the night of her 16th birthday in the form of a vision, so vivid and complete that she had woken from it, certain she was still inside it, a vision of a man's face, a man she had not yet met, a man whose name came to her not in the vision itself but in the days after, in the slow crystalline way of true sight, which is never dramatic and never gentle, and does not care whether you are ready. The name had been Kale. The Ashveil bloodline's hidden power was sight. The old kind, the kind written about in the first texts, as the capacity of certain bloodlines to perceive mate bond formation before it was declared, before it was even felt by the bonded pair. It was not prophecy. It was more precise than prophecy and more unsettling. It was the ability to see, with the clarity of something already true, the moment when 2 lives became structurally necessary to each other, when the bond formed its first invisible thread. Her father had seen her mother before he met her. He had known her face for 2 months before the introduction was arranged. Mara had seen the Alpha King of Ironveil, and she had seen herself beside him, and she had understood, at 16, that this was not a wish or a dream but a fact. The kind of fact the universe files quietly in its permanent records, waiting for the physical world to catch up. Then her father had died. Then Aldrich had come. Then she had said yes and become no one. She had arrived at the castle as a domestic servant 3 months after her 17th birthday, wearing plain clothes and her mother's old work shoes, carrying the version of herself that had been stripped down to its minimum requirements and told to take up no space. She had been assigned to the East Wing. She had been trained in the care of formal chambers. She had been issued a uniform. No one in the castle knew what she was. Her sisters thought she was safe in the eastern reaches, which was the story Aldrich had given them. They did not search for her. She had chosen to believe that meant they were protecting themselves, not that they had chosen comfort over her. She had believed it with varying degrees of success over 4 years, and on the worst days she had almost stopped believing it entirely. The Alpha King had arrived at the castle 6 months after she did. He was 24, newly ascended, and everything the sight had shown her. Dark-haired, broad-shouldered, with a quality of stillness that was unusual in powerful men. A kind of interior quiet that she recognized from the vision, the way you recognize a place you have only ever seen in photographs. He had walked into the East Wing on his first inspection tour, and she had been pressed against the wall with the other servants, eyes down, hands folded, and he had passed within 4 feet of her without pausing. The thread was already there. She felt it like a low note, not pain, not pleasure, just presence, the sense of something tuned to a frequency she carried in her bones. He did not feel it, or if he did not know what it was. That was the nature of sight. It gave the seer awareness the bonded pair had not yet developed. The bond was real, but it would not manifest in him until the conditions aligned, until proximity and time, and whatever mysterious internal architecture the mate bond required had done their slow work. She spent 4 years watching that happen from a distance of approximately 10 feet. He was a fair alpha, strict, capable, occasionally brusque, with a quality of justice she had found, in her limited experience of powerful men, to be genuinely rare. He did not treat servants badly. He did not treat them well in the way of men who need to be observed being good. He treated them with a kind of matter-of-fact courtesy that suggested he simply did not see a meaningful difference between a servant's dignity and anyone else's. This made him considerably more dangerous to her equilibrium than a man who was either callous or performatively kind would have been. She learned his schedule, not because she was assigned to it, though she was, but because she found herself organizing her own day around the moments when she would be in a room he had recently occupied, breathing air that still held his presence, moving through the spaces of his life with the careful attention of someone who knew they were borrowing something that did not belong to them. She told herself this was manageable. She told herself it was a condition she had accepted along with all the other conditions of her reduced life, that it was simply a feature of the site's particular cruelty, to know and not be able to say, to feel the bond and be unable to declare it, to clean his desk every morning with careful hands while the man the universe had apparently decided she was necessary to moved through his days without knowing she existed in any meaningful sense. She told herself this, and it was even mostly true, until the morning 6 weeks before the ceremony, when she came to clean his chambers early and found him already awake, standing at the window in his shirt sleeves, watching the fog come off the western ridge, and she stood in the doorway for 3 full seconds before he turned and saw her. "Mara," he said, "that was the 4th time." "I'm sorry," she said, "I can come back." "No," he said, "come in." She came in, she began to work. He stood at the window and she moved through the room around him, and there was a quality to the silence that was different from the silences of the previous 30-odd months. Fuller, somehow, as if it had acquired a specific weight and did not intend to leave. She became aware of her own breathing. She became aware of the 12 feet between them as something with a texture, as if the air in that space had been reorganized, he said, without turning from the window. How long have you been in the castle's employ? She paused. 4 years. Where were you before? A pause she allowed herself, brief and controlled. The eastern reaches. Family there? Some. The word cost more than he could have known. He turned then. He looked at her with the particular focus that she had catalogued in him over 4 years. The quality of attention that meant he was actually seeing the person in front of him rather than the role they occupied. It did something uncomfortable to her composure. She moved the cleaning cloth in its prescribed circles. You're very quiet, he said. I find it suits the work, she said. There was something at the edge of his expression, not suspicion, not recognition, but something that belonged to the category of almost knowing, the slightly unsettled look of a man who has heard a note he can't place. She recognized it. She had been watching for it for 4 years. He turned back to the window. I'll be making an announcement at the winter ceremony, he said, regarding the Luna selection. Congratulations, she said. It came out smooth as a river stone. She was very proud of that. He didn't respond to that. He watched the fog. She watched her own hands. That night she wrote the letter. It took her 3 attempts. The first was too raw. Too much of the sight in it. Too much explanation of what she was and what she had seen, and why she had spent 4 years cleaning his chambers with the focused devotion of a woman who knew something he didn't. The second was too controlled, too formal, the kind of letter you write when you are trying not to be seen rather than trying to be honest. The third one she kept because it struck the balance she was looking for. The truth, plainly told, without demand or performance or the expectation of response. She told him her full name. She told him what the Asheville bloodline was, what the sight had shown her when it had shown her. She told him she had not come to the castle to act on any of it, that she had come because it was the only choice available to her, and had stayed because she had nowhere else to go and had allowed herself to feel what she felt, because she had been young and alone, and the sight is not a thing you can refuse. She told him she did not expect him to do anything with the information. She told him she wanted him to be happy because it was a true, and because she was a woman who had learned to say true things in letters when she could not say them out loud. She sealed it with the crescent moon. She put it on his desk on a Tuesday morning, under the silver inkwell, and told herself that the act of writing it, the act of the truth being somewhere in the world where it could theoretically be found, was enough. He had not read it. In the 3 weeks between the Tuesday she placed it and the Tuesday she came to clean his chambers. On the day of the ceremony, she had constructed an elaborate architecture of acceptable explanations. He had been busy with preparations. The desk was crowded with correspondence. The inkwell was large enough to obscure the fold. He had not noticed it. It did not mean anything about the weight of her words or the weight of her existence, that a letter placed carefully in a man's private chambers could go unread for 3 weeks, while he arranged the rest of his life. She had almost believed it. She was still almost believing it when she heard the ceremony start downstairs and moved the inkwell and found the seal unbroken and understood. He had not read it because the space beneath his inkwell was not a space he inhabited. She inhabited it. She was the one who cleaned it, who moved things carefully and replaced them, who organized the surface of his life with the devotion of someone who understood its geography intimately. He had not noticed the letter because he did not see that part of his desk the way she saw it, as significant, as attended to, as a space in which something carefully placed might be found. She had put the letter exactly where he would never look. She broke the seal and read it back to herself while the ceremony played out below, and she heard her own voice in the words, and she thought, This is what it costs, to be invisible so long that even your most deliberate acts of visibility disappear. This is the price of the choice I made when I was 17 and alone. This is what I agreed to, and it is time to stop pretending I did not know what I was agreeing to. That was when the door opened. That was when he came in. She set the letter on the desk and told him she would finish the windows. And she crossed to the window and began to clean it with both hands steady, and he stood in the room behind her, and the ceremony ended below them, and she breathed the smell of pine resin and rain on stone and cleaned glass she could barely see through. She expected him to leave. She had given him every social structure by which he could have left. The polite dismissal, the return to work, the implication that there was nothing to discuss, that she was a servant finishing a task, and he was a king who had just named his chosen and had better things to do than stand in a room with a woman who cleaned his chambers. He did not leave. The silence between them stretched and shifted. She could feel him behind her the way she had always felt him. That low, constant note, that presence with a frequency her bones recognized without consultation. It was more pronounced today. She did not know if that was the ceremony, the letter, the broken seal, or simply the accumulated weight of 4 years finally reaching a threshold. "What was your name?" he said. "Before." She stopped moving the cloth. "Mara Ashveil." The silence that followed had a different quality from the ones before it. She heard him cross the room, not toward her, but toward the desk. She heard the sound of paper unfolding. He was reading the letter. She turned from the window and watched him. He stood at the desk with his back to her, his shoulders very still, and she watched the quality of his stillness change as he read, watched it move from controlled to something else, something that had the texture of a man encountering information that requires him to revise everything he thought. He understood about a room he has been standing in for 4 years. The ceremony had officially ended 18 minutes ago. The woman he had named, a daughter of the Harrow house, well-suited, politically advantageous, with no power the pack registry could not contain, was presumably still in the great hall accepting congratulations. The binding was complete in form but not yet sealed. The sealing required a secondary ritual performed at the full moon, 3 weeks away. 3 weeks. Mara did not think about that. She watched him read. When he reached the end of the letter, he stood without turning for a very long moment, one hand flat on the desk beside the parchment, and she could see from the angle of his shoulders that he was breathing slowly and deliberately, the way he breathed when he was arriving at a decision. He turned. "How long ago did you put this here?" he said. 3 weeks. His jaw moved. "The day I told you about the ceremony." "Yes." "And the site," he said. "The Ashveil bloodline." "Yes. Your father was Edric Ashveil." It was not a question. She recognized in his voice the sound of pieces assembling themselves, the specific tone of a man who has been keeping records in his head and has just found the key to organizing them. "Aldrich told the council your father's line had been removed from the registry for blood breaking." "Yes," she said. "He said the line died with your father, that there were no surviving members." "He was mistaken," she said. She held his gaze. She had been practicing this, in some interior room of herself, for 4 years. The moment when she would look at him without the performance of invisibility, when she would allow herself to be actually present in a room he occupied, rather than the careful absence she had constructed. She found it was not as difficult as she had anticipated. The steadiness that she had built over 4 years was real. It was hers. It had cost her enough that she was entitled to it. "Aldrich offered you a choice," he said, slowly, testing the shape of what he was understanding. "You were 17. He told you to disappear. He told me the disappearance would protect my sisters. Your sisters think you're dead." The word landed with its full weight. She let it. "I expect so," she said. He crossed to the window, not to the spot where she had been standing, but to the other window, the north-facing one, and stood with his back to the room and his hands at his sides. And she watched him from the center of room, and did not speak because this was a moment that belonged to him. The recalibration of a man who has just discovered that the structure of his understanding has been standing on false foundations, and he was entitled to it the same way. She was entitled to her steadiness. The lodge fire down in the great courtyard was lit for the ceremony. She could see the edge of its light from where she stood, the orange flicker at the margins of the north window's view. The pack would be celebrating. The entire territory of Ironveil would be celebrating the naming of its Alpha King's Luna, and the Alpha King was standing in his private chambers reading a servant's letter, and the servant was watching him from the center of the room, with 4 years of catalogued mornings, and a crescent moon seal, and a name she had almost forgotten was hers. "You could have told me," he said. He did not turn from the window. "I was invisible," she said. "That was the arrangement. I spoke to you 6 weeks ago. You asked me how long I had been employed. You told me about the ceremony. Those are different from telling." He turned. The lodge fire's light was at his back now, and she could not read his expression clearly. But she could read his stillness, and she understood that his stillness was the same mechanism as her steadiness. The physical signature of a feeling too large to be expressed as movement. "Your sight," he said. "What did it show you?" "You know what it showed me," she said. "You read the letter." "I want to hear it." She stood in the center of the room for a moment that felt longer than it was. The fire moved outside the window. The ceremony sounds below had dissolved into something quieter, the low murmur of celebration settling into the long evening, the particular texture of a large gathering beginning to disperse. "It showed me your face," she said. "I was 16. I had not yet met you, had not yet heard your name. I saw your face, and I felt the bond form, not as a feeling, but as a fact. The sight is not emotional. It does not ask you whether you want what it shows you. It is simply accurate." She paused. "It showed me myself beside you, not as a servant, as a—" She stopped. "As a Luna," he said. "I was 17, she said. Aldrich came. I said yes to the arrangement. And then I came here and it turned out. The sight had already moved on to the next part without consulting me. Something very close to dry, which surprised her. I found that inconvenient." He made a sound that was not quite a laugh, but came from the same place a laugh would. It changed the room slightly, opened something in the air between them. She felt the thread she had been aware of for 4 years respond to it, that low note rising fractionally in frequency, and she set her jaw and refused to let it show on her face. "I'm going to send for Aldrich," he said. "Tonight? Tonight?" She was quiet. "He will deny it. He has no reason to confirm anything that makes him look like—" "He will confirm it," Kale said, "or he will cease to be High Keeper." There was no heat in it, no performative anger. It was the Alpha's voice, the one she had heard 4 times in 4 years in close proximity and 1,000 times at a distance. The voice of a man who has made a decision and is simply describing what will happen next. "I want the full council record of the Ashveil case, the registry entry, the original accusation. I want to know what was actually there and what was fabricated." "It was fabricated," she said quietly. "All of it. The blood-breaking accusation was constructed to provide grounds for removing the line. Aldrich wanted the sight suppressed." Why? She had thought about this for 4 years. Because sight-bearers cannot be managed in the way that other packmates can. If you know what I am, if the pack knows, then there is a standing claim on legitimacy that originates outside the Alpha's selection. Aldrich's entire architecture of ceremony and council is built on the principle that the Alpha's chosen is the Alpha's choice. A sight-bearer complicates that. I was inconvenient. He looked at her for a long moment. "You have been thinking about this for some time." "I have had ample quiet time," she said. He crossed to her then. Not fast. Nothing about KL was fast. She knew this about him with the intimacy of 4 years of close and careful observation, but with the directness of a man who has finished deliberating and has committed to a direction. He stopped close enough that she could smell the pine resin clearly, and she stood her ground because she was a woman who had been invisible for 4 years and had found in the last 40 minutes that she was done with that particular arrangement. He looked at her. She looked back. Mara Ashvale, he said. Her name, her full name, both parts, the second part that no one in this castle had spoken aloud since before her father died. Yes, she said. You stayed, he said. 4 years you cleaned my chambers. You wrote me a letter and put it where you thought I might find it. And when I didn't, you came back to finish the windows. I also cleaned the grate, she said, and organized the inkwell. Why didn't you give it to me directly? Because I was invisible, she said again. I had agreed to be. A servant does not hand the Alpha King a letter and say, Your High Keeper exiled me when I was 17 because I saw your face in a vision, and he found that politically inconvenient. That is not a thing invisible people do. You broke the seal and read it yourself. Today I decided to stop being invisible. Why today? She held his gaze. Because you named your chosen. Because the full moon is in 3 weeks and the sealing ritual has not yet occurred. Because 4 years is long enough to have been a reasonable person about an unreasonable situation. And I have been very reasonable, and I find that I am done. She paused. Also, you were standing in my way. The thing that happened at the corner of his mouth then was not something she had seen in 4 years of catalogue. It was new. It undid something in her chest that had been very carefully assembled. You sound, he said slowly, like someone who has been a Luna for a very long time already and has been waiting for the paperwork to catch up. She said nothing. The fire moved outside the window. He was close enough that the bond note had stopped being a note and had become something more like a chord. Multiple frequencies, harmonized, the kind of sound that lives in walls and foundations rather than air. I am going to speak with Aldrich, he said. Tonight, I am going to have the registry reopened and the Ashville line restored. That will take some time. There is a process. He was still looking at her. While that process occurs, I am going to ask you to do something that I have not earned the right to ask and that you are under no obligation to agree to. She waited. Stay visible, he said. Just that. Stay where I can see you. She breathed in slowly through her nose. I have been in this castle for 4 years, she said. I am not going anywhere. He nodded. He stepped back. The cord did not diminish with distance the way the note had. It held, as if the proximity had established something that mere feet could not undo. She picked up her cleaning cloth from the windowsill. I'll finish the east window, she said. He went to the door. He paused. She could feel him pause without turning. Could feel the moment of his turning back, the way she had always felt the moments of his attention, except that now it was larger, less containable, threaded with something that had not been there before or had been there all along and simply needed today to name itself. The letter, he said. You wrote that you wanted me to be happy. Yes, she said, before you knew whether telling the truth would change anything. Yes. A silence. That's not how people usually write letters like that. I'm not usually how people usually are, she said. He left. She stood at the east window, with her cleaning cloth and the trembling thing in her chest that she refused to let into her hands, and she cleaned the glass in long, careful strokes. And the lodge fire burned outside, and the ceremony's celebration unwound itself into the long territorial evening, and the letter lay open on the desk behind her. The weeks between the naming and the full moon were the longest of her life, and also, in a way she would not have predicted, some of the quietest. She had expected upheaval, the immediate kind, the kind that comes when suppressed truths break the surface, and everyone who has a stake in the previous arrangement begins defending it loudly. She had expected Aldrich to fight. She had expected the council to resist. She had expected, on some low animal level, to be removed. She was not removed. What happened instead was slower and more complicated. Cale summoned Aldrich, the night of the ceremony, privately, and whatever passed between them in that meeting was not recorded and was not shared. But the following morning Aldrich requested a brief recess from his ceremonial duties, and the assistant keeper presided over the dawn rites, and this was noted by everyone in the castle, with the particular silent attentiveness of people who have learned to read institutional weather. Mara continued to work. She was in the East Wing. She was assigned to the East Wing. She had nowhere else to go, and she had told him she was staying, and she did not break her word. She came to his chambers every morning, and she did not find him there, because he had rearranged his schedule to be in the council room in the early hours. Official. She understood this was deliberate, that he was managing the optics of her presence in the castle by not being where she was, by removing the possibility of observed proximity before the restoration was official. She understood this was not avoidance. She understood it as a kind of care, the practical care of a man trying to protect her while the machinery of correction worked through its necessary stages. She cleaned his chambers. She organized the inkwell, the leather correspondence folders, the stack of territorial maps he had been consulting for the upcoming boundary negotiation with the Eastern Reaches. She noticed on the third morning that the letter was gone from the desk. She did not know what this meant. She decided it meant he had kept it, and she held that conclusion carefully, as if it were something breakable. The restoration of the Ironveil registry entry took 11 days. She knew it was done when a young council scribe came to the East Wing with a formal scroll bearing the Alpha King's seal and asked, with the slightly dazed quality of a person who has been given instructions they did not expect, whether there was a Mara Ironveil in residence. She set down her cleaning cloth. She said, "Yes." The scribe handed her the scroll, actually bowed to her, and she felt the weight of that small gesture in her sternum like a stone settling into place, and retreated back up the corridor. The scroll restored the Ironveil name to the Ironveil pack registry. It reinstated the bloodline's classification as a site-bearing line under the first text's designation. It included a formal notation in the Alpha's own hand that the previous removal had been conducted under false pretenses and was hereby reversed with full retroactive standing. There was also a separate, smaller note tucked inside the scroll, not official, not formatted with any of the language of governance or registry. It said, "The east window was the cleanest one, I noticed." She stood in the East Wing corridor with the scroll in one hand and the note in the other, and the trembling thing in her chest expanded into her throat, and she pressed her lips together hard and looked at the ceiling and refused, with everything she had, to cry in the corridor. The refusal was effortful. She was prouder of it than of almost anything else she had managed in recent memory. She did not see him alone again until the night before the full moon. She had been present at the formal address in which he announced the Ironveil restoration to the Pack Council. She had stood at the back of the council chamber, no longer in her servant's uniform, but in a borrowed dress of dark green wool that fit her imperfectly and made her feel simultaneously overdressed and underprepared. Kakel had read the restoration declaration in his Alpha's voice, the flat, factual one, and when he reached the notation about false pretenses he had looked up from the document briefly, not at the council, and she had been watching, and his eyes had found her at the back of the chamber, with the precision of someone who always knew where she was, which was, she had realized in that moment, what it meant to be seen. Aldrich was present at the address. He was pale, and his ceremonial posture was perfect, and he did not speak. She had watched him the way you watch something you have been afraid of for a long time, discovering that the diminishment of fear changes the shape of the feared thing. He was smaller than she remembered from the stone room, from the night he had offered her 2 kinds of disappearing. He was an old man with a structured face and a talent for institutional control, and he had made a choice about her father and about her that he had calculated she was too young to ever be able to counter. He had been wrong. She did not feel triumph about that. She felt something quieter, the satisfaction of a debt recorded correctly, a number entered in the right column. Her sisters came 4 days after the council address. They had received the restoration notice by sealed post, which meant they had received it in the form of official documentation before they received any explanation, which meant they arrived at the castle gate in a state of considerable discomposure. They came in the late afternoon, the 2 of them together, the way they had always done everything. And when Mara walked out to meet them in the courtyard, they both stopped and looked at her with the particular expression of people who are revising a belief they have held so long they forgot they were holding it. The elder Sarana said nothing for a moment. Then she said, "You look like your mother." No, Mara said. The 3 of them stood in the courtyard. Sarana crossed to her first, and the embrace was the kind that does not have a comfortable shape because both people have been holding themselves away from something for so long that they have forgotten how to lean. The younger Dara arrived, next, less restrained, and held on with the fierce clutching grip of someone who had been a child the last time they had done this and was an adult now, and felt the gap between those 2 facts like a physical ache. Mara held them both. The trembling thing in her chest was very large now, and she let it be large. The courtyard smelled of cold stone, and the smoke from the lodge fire, and the lingering scent of celebration, still attached to the banners, and she stood in it with her sister's arms around her, and her feet on the pack's earth, and her name in the registry. And she breathed in slowly and let herself be present without the architecture of invisibility, without the management of her own visibility, without any protective mechanism at all. It lasted several minutes. Afterward, Sarana told her, quietly, separately, that Aldrich had come to them in the weeks after their father's death and told them Mara had left the territory voluntarily, had left with a man she had apparently formed an attachment to, had chosen to go, had sent word that she was well. That was the story they had been given. That was the story they had built a grief around, not the grief of losing a sitter, but the stranger, more complicated grief of being left behind by one. They had mourned her sideways, through resentment and confusion, which was worse than mourning her directly would have been. Mara sat with this for a long time. She sat with the knowledge of what Aldrich had cost all 3 of them, not just her, and she found that this, the full accounting, the complete ledger, changed her understanding of what she wanted from the restoration. She had thought, in the years of invisible calculation, that what she wanted was her name back. Just that. The simple factual correction. She understood now that what she wanted was for her sisters to know she had not chosen to leave them. That was the debt that needed settling. The registry was paperwork. This was the actual thing. The night before the full moon, Cale came to the east wing. It was late, past the hour when the castle's formal activity had concluded, when the upper floors were quiet and the servants had retired to their quarters. She was awake. She had been awake for several nights in a sequence. Not from anxiety, but from something that was too alert to be restlessness, and too contained to be excitement. Kind of heightened wakefulness that she recognized from the night before the sight had first arrived. The same interior quality of waiting for something that had already been decided. He knocked. This was remarkable. She had cleaned chambers for 4 years. He had never knocked on anything to indicate her presence was required. She opened the door. He was in plain clothes. No ceremonial markers, no formal insignia, the same quality of presence she had observed in the morning window 6 weeks ago. The man without the office's architecture around him. He looked in the low corridor light like someone who had been awake for several nights as well. The ceiling is tomorrow, he said. I know, she said. It can't be unsealed. He said this with great care, the care of a man laying out the terms of something that is important not to misstate. Once the full moon rite is completed, the bond is sealed in pack law. There's no administrative path back from it. She waited. Ilara Harrow is a capable woman, he said. She understood when I spoke with her that the naming was premature. She was generous about it, more generous than she was required to be. I would not have expected otherwise from a Harrow, Mara said. No. A pause. There will be people who find the change in circumstance difficult to accept. The Council has ratified the Ironveil restoration, but ratification is not the same as welcome. You would be coming into a position that some will contest. I have been invisible in this castle for 4 years, she said. I am familiar with contestation. You would also be. He stopped, reconsidered. I am trying to lay this out fairly. You are trying, she said carefully, to give me the opportunity to say no. He looked at her. Yes, she leaned against the doorframe. She looked at him in the low corridor light, and she thought about the Earl who had sat in a stone room at 7 heat and said yes to the wrong thing because she had not understood that she had other options. She thought about 4 years of careful invisibility and crescent moon seals and cleaning cloth moved in prescribed circles. She thought about the letter she had written and the note tucked inside the scroll about the east window being clean and Sarana's face in the courtyard and the thread that had been a note and was now a cord and was tonight something more like a resonance she could feel in the floor. Cale, she said. He went still. I wrote you a letter, she said. I put it under your inkwell on a Tuesday morning, and then I came back the next day and moved the inkwell and cleaned around it and put it back. I did this for 3 weeks, not because I was hoping you would find it, because I had already decided when I put it there that the act of writing the truth was sufficient, that putting it in the world where it could theoretically be found was the closest I could come to saying it, and that was enough. That was all I was going to ask of myself. Mara, I am not done, she said, not unkindly. He was quiet. What I am trying to say is that I have already given you everything I know how to give, she said. I gave you the truth of what I was. I gave you the site's account of what exists between us. I put it in writing under a crescent moon seal, and I cleaned around it for 3 weeks, and when the ceremony happened, and the seal was still unbroken, I read it back to myself in your chambers to make sure I still believed it. She stopped. I still believe it. I have believed it since I was 16 years old. I have been believing it through 4 years of being invisible, and I am going to keep believing it regardless of what you say next. But I am not going to perform uncertainty about it for the sake of appearing appropriately humble. I am not that girl in the stone room anymore. I have not been her for some time. He held her gaze. The corridor was very quiet. The note, the chord, the resonance was very present. Good, he said. Soft, direct, absolute. She felt it move through her the way the sight had moved through her at 16. Not as emotion, but as fact. A thing accurately known. A thing the universe had already filed in its permanent record, and was only now allowing the physical world to acknowledge. She had not cried in the corridor. She was not going to cry in the doorway. She stood straight in the doorframe and she said, "The full moon ceremony is tomorrow." "Yes," he said. "I expect I'll need something to wear that fits properly," she said. "The green wool was borrowed and it doesn't sit right on the left shoulder." He exhaled. That sound, that was not quite a laugh, and came from the same place a laugh would, and this time it was warmer, fuller, and it did more damage to her assembled composure than anything else that had happened in the preceding 40 minutes. "I'll have something sent up in the morning." "Mara Ashveil," he said. "Cale Ironveil," she said. It was the first time she had said his name to his face. She felt the symmetry of it, the exchange of names as a kind of mutual declaration, a small formal acknowledgement that they were both fully present, both using their whole names, both standing in their own truth without the management of visibility or the architecture of ceremony. He reached out. He touched her hand. Not her wrist, not her face, her hand, the same hand she had used to clean his desk for 4 years, and he held it briefly with a steadiness that matched hers and then let go. "I'll see you at the ceremony," he said. "I'll be there," she said. He walked back down the corridor. She watched him go. The lodge fire's light moved at the end of the hall from the window near the stair, orange and living, and she stood in her doorway and felt the resonance hold, even as the distance increased, that quality of a thing that has been established and does not require proximity to remain true. She closed the door. She sat on the edge of her narrow bed, and she put her hands flat on her knees, and she breathed in, and then she let the trembling thing in her chest finally be as large as it actually was, and it was very large, and it took a significant amount of time, and she was glad for the privacy of it. In the morning, there was a dress on the hook outside her door. It was a dark silver gray, not ceremonial but formal, and it fit perfectly on the left shoulder. She put it on, and she looked at herself in the narrow mirror above the washstand, and she let herself be looked at. Not by Cale, not by the council, not by the pack, by herself, just herself. The woman who was Mara Ashveil, site-bearer of the Ashveil line, resident of the East Wing, person who cleaned windows with considerable thoroughness and wrote honest letters and sealed them with crescent moons, and had been, for 4 years, the most invisible relevant person in the Ironveil castle. She was not invisible now. The full moon ceremony was held in the great courtyard, in the open air under the rising moon, with the whole of the pack's inner circle in attendance, and the lodge fire burning, and the banners of Ironveil catching the night wind. High Keeper Aldrich was not present. The assistant keeper stood at the ritual stone with the ceremonial cords, and Mara understood from his slightly startled expression, when she walked into the courtyard in the silver-gray dress, that he had not expected to recognize her and was recalibrating in real time. She walked through the pack's inner circle to the front, because she had decided that if she was going to be visible, she was going to be visible completely, without hedging, without the apologetic sideways movement of someone who is not sure they are entitled to the space they are taking. She moved through people who stared, and some who whispered, and a few who nodded with the deliberate respect of those who had already done their recalibrating and arrived at a position. She saw Serana and Dara at the edge of the gathering. She had not known they would stay, and Serana lifted her chin with the contained fierce pride of an older sister, watching something she had not allowed herself to hope for actually come to pass. Mara took her place at the ritual stone. Cale was already there. He stood in his formal dress, the dark coat with the silver Ironveil mark at the collar, and he watched her cross the courtyard with that quality of attention she had catalogued in him. The actually seeing kind, not the role-seeing kind, and when she reached the stone and stood beside him, his stillness had the same texture as the corridor the night before, the physical signature of something too large to express as movement. The assistant keeper performed the rite. The ceremonial cords were bound. The words were spoken. The moon was full and bright above the courtyard, and the lodge fire burned in the corner of her vision, and she could smell pine resin and night air and cold stone and the smoke of a celebration that was, this time, hers. The cord was bound around their joined hands. Cale said the words. She said the words. The thread she had felt for 4 years became, the chord became, the resonance became, in the moment of the sealing, something she had no precise vocabulary for, something that lived in the same register as the sight itself, below language, below emotion, in the layer where truths are simply stored, because they have always been true, and the world has only just caught up. She felt it settle, not like an arrival, like a recognition, like the moment you seen something you had believed was lost, and understand that it was with you the entire time, waiting in the place where you had always, on some level, known to look. Afterward, in the quiet after the rite, when the courtyard was filling with the particular warmth of celebration, and her sisters were moving toward her through the crowd, and the assistant keeper was beaming with an energy that suggested he understood. He had just been present for something significant. Kale turned to look at her, and she turned to look at him, and they stood for a moment in the middle of all of it, the fire, the moon, the pack, the full accounting of 4 years arriving at its resolution. Without saying anything, then she said very quietly, "The east window." And he said, "You were thorough." And she said, "I am usually thorough." And that was the beginning of everything else, not the end of the difficulty, because there were still the council members who required time, and Aldrich's accounting, which took months, and the reconnection with her sisters, which was not simple and did not resolve in a single courtyard embrace, and the learning of herself as a woman with a name and a standing, and a voice in a place that had required her silence for 4 years, all of which would take more time and more steadiness than she had yet been called to produce. But that, the foundation of it, a woman who had cleaned his chambers for 4 years, and written the truth in a letter, and sealed it with a crescent moon, and left it in a place she knew he would never look, because the act of writing it was what she had needed, not the reading, and who had stood at his window cleaning glass she could barely see through, and had decided, once and for all, that 4 years was long enough, that invisible was long enough, that she had been reasonable about an unreasonable situation for precisely as long as she was going to be, and it was time now to be seen, and she was.